Some people think the world is flat. Some people think the world is round. But the serpent says, here, just take this apple and eat it. If you do, your consciousness will be raised such that you can figure it out for yourself. Then take this apple to your husband, boyfriend, or significant other and trick him into eating it, and he'll be smart too. Anyway, I'd like to go all the way back to my video called The Amplified Circle of Fifths, #1 Introduction. I'd like to go all the way back, make sure I've covered everything before I move on to my next topic, my next idea. Okay, so please be patient. I'd like to review topic number 17. All right, I'd like to go back all the way back to video #1. I talked about intra-ring tri-cell groups and how they yield patterns and scales. Okay, so in that first video, I showed you this little chart I made. All right, and we have tri-cell groups. Okay, and each comes from one ring, one data ring. Okay, there's different tri-cell groups, right? Now, if you don't remember that, let's just take one quadrant from our amplified circle of fifths, all right? And remember, this is your counter major data ring. This is your major data ring, and your minor data ring, and your diminished data ring, all right? So the whole idea was, in that video, that first video called Introduction, at about the 18-minute and 26-second point, I said this. I said, within any given data ring, intra-ring tri-cell tone groups yield patterns. And I talked about the tones that were included, all right? And I talked about the tones that were absent. Right, so if we go back to this chart again, we show that if we took within one data ring, all right, we took 3 tones, that makes what I call a perfect chord. That's my theoretical perfect chord, all right, and you took the notes from each of these diatonic chords, F chord, C chord, G chord, they're all major because they're in the major data ring, all right? We put them together, we end up with tones, and those tones make a scale. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But I did this in video #1, Introduction. I want to review it. This is very important and it's very interesting. I think the amplified circle of fifths might be a whole lot better and more useful than I originally thought. So back in that video I said, study this on your own and think it through. But I noticed I'm not getting many hits on some of my amplified circle of fifths videos, so either people are not finding it interesting, or they think it's crap, or I'm not explaining it well. So I'm doing this video just in case I didn't explain it well. Now we have my theory. It's a theory. I invented or came up with this idea of the perfect chord. Here's an example of a C with your tonal center C, and that's a perfect chord. All right, and I talked about how I failed to create a chord notation system and a scale system using the theoretical perfect chord. I failed, but even though I failed, it helped me when I was working on and designing my amplified circle of fifths. So it came in handy, it was useful. You say, well, how is it useful? Well, if you take your perfect chord theory, it's just a theory, all right? You have a tri-cell group of tones, and from that, you can get diatonic chords. You know, from your regular diatonic scale, let's say C major scale, all right? You map out your scale, and then you figure out your chords, whether they be major, minor, or diminished, all right? And then from that, you get your diatonic tones, and then you get scale shapes. Now what that means is, it helped me, all right, it helped me create the amplified circle of fifths the way it's designed. It helped me do that. It helped me figure out where to put the tones, all right, and how the tones can translate into chords, all right, and then we move from there. Now I hope I'm explaining this clearly. Let's say we take one quadrant, all right. We take one quadrant that I've showed many times using my handy tool. All right, we take one quadrant from the entire circle, all right? That would be 3 slices. Now you see here, you know from previous videos that this is the counter major data ring, so we can envision major chords, and these are the roots. A flat major, E flat major, B flat major. And here's a data ring, major data ring, so you can envision your major chords. The minor data ring, you can envision your minors. And here's your diminished ring, and you can think of this as a B diminished chord, F sharp diminished, C sharp diminished, all right? You can do that. Now once you understand that, you can do this. Now let's move to the rectangular version of this, so it's a little bit easier to see, right? A little bit easier to see. So here we have the same thing, only in rectangular version. Here's your slices, right? And here's your data rings, all right? And here's your tonal center, C, put a little dot there. That's C. So you see you have your counter major data ring, your major data ring, your minor, and your diminished data ring. Now with that in mind, as I said repeatedly, you can now envision major chords, minor chords, see I even put the minor symbol, and diminished chords. Now, if you understand that so far, let's do an example. Let's show how it works. All right, let's take your major data ring, and you have your perfect chord, that's 3 tones. All right, your perfect chord, and there's your tonal center. And you see here the tones in your F major chord. You see the tones for your C major chord and the tones for your G major chord. So you map them out over here on your blank graph, and you get these tones. Well, you not only get these tones, but you see that it's the C major scale. You took the chord tones from this tri-cell group, and you got a scale, and you also have what I call a scale shape. I call it a scale shape. I don't know if anybody uses that term, but I do. Maybe I invented it, I don't know. So that's just one example, because you took 3 tones from your amplified circle of fifths, all right? You mapped out the tones of each major chord, and you got something. You get patterns or you get scales, but you get something useful. You say, well, you just got lucky, Joey. I say, no, let's do it again. Let's look at the minor data ring, and let's look at those 3 tones, and we'll assume that they are minor chords because they're in the minor data ring, all right? You map out the tones. You say, oh, I know the tones of that chord. I know what they are, and you write them out. Then you map them out on your graph, on your circle of fifths. Now this is the rectangular version, for it's easier to see, all right? You map them out, and you see you got the same tones as you did for the major tri-cell group, all right? But what we really have here is, theoretically, we have an A minor 3 scale. In other words, that's what you would call a natural minor. Traditionally, you would call it natural minor. In my book, in my system, I call it the minor 3 scale, but look, it's the same tones, but they were fashioned after the chord tones of the tri-cell group that fell in the minor data ring. Now that's a beautiful thing. That's a beautiful thing, right? Now let's take another example. Let's go to your counter major data ring, and you have these tones, and you figure out what the major chord tones would be, because it's in the major, counter major data ring. So that signifies a major flavor, okay? So you map out your tones, and this is what you get. And you see what you get here is, immediately you see you have the E flat major scale, all right? You have your E flat major scale. Now if you go all the way back to your circle of fifths, you get your handy tool here, all right? You get your handy tool, you go back to your original circle of fifths, you see just from this one quadrant, okay, 3 slices, one quadrant, we got our C major scale, we got our A natural minor, which is the relative minor of your C, and you have the E flat major scale you got just from the examples I showed. And that's just one of many, many, many things you can find on here. But I'm just trying to get you to be able to follow along to see if you understand what I'm talking about. Now, if you move to the diminished data ring, all right? Let's go down here to the diminished data ring, all right? You have your 3 tones and you map out the diminished chord tones. You see what they are here. See, I have them written down. And you map them out over here on your graph, which is basically your circle of fifths, only I'm showing you in rectangular fashion, so it's easier to see. And you get this. You don't get 7 tones, you get 9 tones. All right? And out of those 9 tones, you get your B blues scale. You see this? And you get your F sharp blues scale. So from this tri-cell group in the diminished data ring, you have the tones that you need to form 2 blues scales. And you see something here right away. You see this? You say, oh, look at that. If you take this scale here and you rotate it 90 degrees, you get this blues scale. You see that, how it works? There are so many things on this amplified circle of fifths that I have to at some point stop making videos, or this will go on for the next 10 years. But there's so much stuff on here. Now you say, okay, Joey, you talked about this diminished data ring, and you talked about how some people put the B tone here, and they put the B tone either here or somewhere else. And I tried that. And it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. I've tried all different combinations. So ultimately you would ask, what is the significance of that B, F sharp, C sharp placement? That B, F sharp, C sharp placement on the amplified circle of fifths. Well, what's the significance? Well, let me tell you. First of all, it provides for optimum functionality. I challenge anybody to design this such that you can get more out of it than I can with my placement. The way I have these tones placed, I challenge anybody to figure out a better way. And you're probably not going to find it. I've been doing this for decades. The second thing is deviation from the traditional circle of fifths. In other words, deviation from the original traditional, all right, is not detrimental. In other words, we have not gone so far away from this, all right, to this. We have not gone so far away that we destroy any benefit or any good stuff that's in the original traditional circle. We have not taken away from this in any way, shape, or form, pun intended. The third thing is, why is the placement significant? And the third thing is 2 distinct blues scales can be drawn, okay, can be pulled out from one quadrant, so you know that in any given quadrant you're going to get at least 2 blues scales, all right? And now the other beautiful thing is, the fourth thing that makes it significant in my mind is the tonal center's aggregating majors blues scale can be realized. Okay, that's a weird sentence. The tonal center's aggregating majors blues scale can be realized. What that means is you have, all right, let's say you have your tonal center here, and you have your aggregating major. We talked about that in previous videos, all right? And you have your aggregating minor. If this is your tonal center, here's your aggregating minor. Now you see here, like I mentioned just a couple days ago, here's a cross-reference here. And I use this cross-reference to affect or to be able to create what I call the super circle shortcut to the blues. Here's your aggregating minor in relation to your C tonal center, and here's a handy cross-reference, a reminder right there, right above the C. So you have that. So we have 4 reasons why this is significant, at least in my small mind. All right? Now, just in a nutshell, let me just grab this paper here. I was trying to show you, this is very, very important. When you look at the tones in one quadrant, and you think of those tones as either major chords, minor chords, or diminished, you can get almost any scale shape you need. I did that in previous videos. I showed that. I showed how it works. Now, you say, oh yeah, but I was paying attention, and there's more than one scale shape. That's correct. That's correct. You can get more than one scale shape for one scale. You can get 2, 3, probably more. It doesn't matter. So let's look at a quick example. This scale shape that I showed here, all right, this basic scale shape. Let's go from the rectangle, okay, the easy rectangle. Let's go back to the actual circle, all right? And here it is on the circle, the C major scale. We just talked about it. Here it is on the actual circle, amplified circle of fifths, all right? Now, that scale shape, this is the beauty of the amplified circle of fifths. All you have to do is slide it. All you have to do is slide it, and you get different scales. Here we slid this, we slid it down, and we got the C minor 3 scale, or you would call that the natural minor, right? Now here, when you go through the major scale and the 6 attendant modes, right? All 6 modes that go with the C major scale, when you go through all the other 6 other modes, all right, you notice something. You notice that there's, on your amplified circle of fifths, there is one quadrant that is not used when you use this scale shape. So when you use this scale shape, all right, when you take that scale shape and you slide it all around to get your other scales, you see, when you slide it all around to get all your other scales and modes, you'll notice that one quadrant is not used. You see, this quadrant is not used. Now, when you take a different scale shape, let's say you use this scale shape here. Okay, you're out now in your counter major data ring, all right? You use this scale shape here, that's different, right? And you slide it, right, to get your different modes. Let's say you slide it and you get these 2, and you slide it and you get these 2, right? Well, here again, you notice something. You notice that with this particular scale shape, all right, you find that this quadrant is not used. It's just not used. It's not needed, right? So for this shape, you have a quadrant that's not used. And for this particular scale shape, if you can see them both, you see a slightly different quadrant is not used, right? For this shape, this quadrant's not used. For this shape, this quadrant's not used. And back when I first started doing this, I said that intra-ring tri-cell tone groups yield scales and patterns. Well, I just showed you the patterns, the design, the way it works. Now, if you take your C minor major scale, you would probably, traditionally, you would probably call this a melodic minor. I don't. In my book, in my system, I call it the minor major. If you use this scale shape, in other words, you can slide it to get your other 6 modes, all right? Same scale shape. All you did was you slid it around, all right? If you use this particular scale shape for your C minor major and its 6 attendant modes, you'll notice that there's one slice that is not used. One slice is not used, all right? And if you do that same C minor major scale with a different scale shape, and you go through all the different 6 other modes, okay? You slide your thing all around, just slide it around. You'll discover also that here's another slice that is not used, right? And that's what I wanted to tell you. I think I made that really clear. There's so much stuff here. I'm really going to try to stop doing this. But I wanted to review number 17, Intra-Ring Tri-Cell groups yield patterns. In other words, they yield your essential scales that you think of in music. Your major scale, your natural minor, etc., etc. Okay, thank you for being incredibly patient, and I'll really try to move to a different idea, a new topic, something a little less boring. So thank you for listening, and good night.